Hello, all. Welcome back to the Brighter Black Futures podcast. I'm your host, Bisa Dobson, and I'm super excited to be with you all here today. So glad to have you all watching and listening as well. And today we've got a super jam-packed, informative podcast ready to go for you. And the subject matter today is something that I think touches many folks in the Black community, but doesn't nearly get enough airtime, and that is autism, particularly its impact on Black families. And I have a super great really informed guest on that subject who you'll meet later on in the interview section. But before I get ahead of myself, let's get into the first segment of the show and get this party started. And the first segment is, of course, upliftments. All right, if you've been here before, you know that the upliftment section is when I share a quote that I absolutely love that's helped me grow and learn or really entrench a perspective that I think is important. And of course, I always choose an author that I really respect. And today it's Ms. Audre Lorde. She was an activist and an author. She passed a long time ago. If you don't know about her, you need to read her work because she's fabulous. And this quote on difference proves that to me. And I think it will to you as well. I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. And here it is. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. So we live in a culture that says, hey, uniqueness is awesome. Yeah, we love you, but conform. Don't stand out. We're going to judge and shame you if you stand out too much. And that back and forth happens to all of us, and a lot of us end up living smaller and not expressing our full difference in order to stay safe and to be accepted in lots of ways. And just recently, somebody I know who I think is amazing, and I know meant it with all the good intentions, said this to me. And as Black people or people of color, you're going to recognize this statement. We hear it a lot. It's a shorthand for, I love everybody. I can hang with everybody. It doesn't matter what you look like. And they say things like, I don't see color. On the surface, that sounds really great, I guess, to some people. But though I don't get offended when I hear it, I just use it as an opportunity to educate and explain that if you don't see my color, if you're saying you don't see my color, that means you're erasing my difference in order to accept me. Why is that necessary? As Audre said, we want to recognize it. So see the difference, accept it, accept that, hey, not just tolerate, but like, hey, that's some person's different from me and we can be okay together. And then celebrate those differences as opportunities to learn and grow, find out new perspectives, learn a new thing. And I think that is something we all should be aiming to do around difference instead of trying to push it away or being afraid of it. And then, of course, acting out in ways that aren't helping anybody. So this quote, I think, ties into the discussion today. And when we get to the interview, you're going to hear some things that Karyn is sharing that will make you remember this quote and think about it. So that's my upliftment quote for today, a quote I love by Miss Audre Lorde. And as I said before, check her out if you don't know about her, because she is top tier as far as her writings. All right, on to the next segment. So let's get into today's Black History moment. So today I'm going to tell you a story about a performer who also happened to be a person who lived with autism. Thomas, or Blind Tom Wiggins, was born on May 25th, 1849 in Georgia to Charity and Domingo Wiggins, who were both enslaved persons. So, of course, Thomas was also a slave at birth. And shortly after his birth, he and his entire family were sold to a lawyer in Columbus, Georgia, named General James Neal Bethune. Now, Tom was born blind, so he could not partake in the regular activities on the plantation, so he was just allowed to play and roam around at his leisure. And by the age of 4, he started to show signs of having musical talent. He heard the Bethune family daughters playing the piano and soon learned to play by ear. And by the age of 5, Tom composed his first tune called A Rainstorm, which mimicked the sound of the rain falling on a tin roof. Upon recognizing young Tom's talent, General Bethune allowed him to live in a room adjacent to the house so he could have access to a piano. And young Tom's skills got to be so great, he was so good at playing by ear, that General Bethune eventually started hiring professional musicians to play for Tom so that he could learn new songs. And Tom learned the songs after hearing them just one single time. And Tom learned a repertoire of over 7,000 songs in this way, including hymns, popular songs, waltzes, and classical repertoire. Tom became so proficient at his craft that by age 11, he was performing at sold-out concerts across the nation. And that same year, 1860, he was invited to perform at the White House for President James Buchanan and a number of Washington socialites, making him the first African American ever to perform at the White House. Unfortunately for Tom, though he is listed as the top earning performer of the 19th century in America, he and his family did not benefit from the monies he earned. It is estimated that blind Tom, in his performances, earned the Bethune family, his enslavers, about $100,000 a year at the height of his career, the equivalent of $2.3 million a year in today's money. Tom continued to perform on concerts and in vaudeville stages until a few years before his death in 1908 at the age of 59. Posthumously, he was honored with a commemorative headstone in Columbus, Georgia, where he spent the bulk of his life. If you are interested in learning more about Tom Wiggins, be sure to check the show notes where I'll share some info about a documentary and a book written about his life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with my special guest today. Her name is Karyn Robison-Renaud. She's a registered social worker and also a mom to a daughter on the spectrum. And in her practice, she focuses on helping families who have children who are autistic in them. So that's her main focus of her practice. Did I get that right, Karyn? Is there anything else you want to say about that?
I guess I just want to add that it's actually a privilege for me to work with families who have a child on the spectrum, obviously because it's part of my own journey, but also because these children and people who are on the spectrum have a lot to teach us and a lot to offer the world. And I want to be one of those people who helps bring that forward. I think that too many people on the spectrum are not appreciated as fully as they want to be. So it's part of what drives my work.
That is beautiful. And I love when I connect with people and I'm able to connect my audience with people who are passionate about what they do. So I think when you're passionate and you care, you help even more and more deeply. So that is great. All right. So today we're going to be talking about kids with autism and particularly Black children with autism and their unique needs. So hopefully you all find this very informative. So just to be clear, I would like to give a very basic definition of autism that I found online, and Karyn can add to it because hers is going to be way more detailed than mine. Autism is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain, and for the most part, it is an inherited disorder, which scientists estimate that up to 80% of a child's risk of developing the condition is determined by DNA, but environmental and behavioral risk factors may also play a role. ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, has many possible symptoms, many of which overlap with other diagnoses. They can include delays in language and learning, social and emotional withdrawal, and an unusual need for routine. So, Karyn, what else would you add to that is missed by that definition?
So I wouldn't actually personally use that definition, to be honest. I find that that definition is only focused on the negative, in my opinion, and I feel that it skews the uniqueness of people on the spectrum as the skills that they have, the uniqueness that they have gets skewed in a negative way. And so because I work in this field and I have to be familiar with how it is defined medically, I am aware of definitions like this. However, sorry, let me back up a tiny bit. So the main organization that defines the different challenges that we work with in private practice and clinics, wherever, is the American Psychological Association. And they have been writing this document. It's usually called like the Psychiatry Bible or something like that. The DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it's been updated many times. The most recent update is the DSM-5. And in that, they do give a very specific definition of autism that I think is very medical based and doesn't speak to the strengths. So I apologize for being long winded, but this is really important to me. So I just want to read how I have reworded it from a strength based perspective. So I do have to read it because I don't have it. Okay. Okay, I don't have it memorized, but I hope to instill it in everybody's minds. So number one, so to meet the criteria for ASD, which I define as autism spectrum differences versus any other ending for that. So to meet the criteria for ASD, a person may have difficulties in each of the three areas of social communication and interaction. So the three areas that they look at are social emotional interactions, like I said, and that's like, how is the person interacting with their family members, community members, peers, etc. The second area is looking at nonverbal communication. So are they able to read another person's facial expressions or body language? Are they able to, how are they expressing their own nonverbal thoughts? Not quite thoughts. I don't quite mean that. I guess, how are they being perceived nonverbally is a more accurate way of putting it. And then the last one is the relationship skills. And so in the DSM, it is written very, like I said, from a medical deficit kind of stance. And I think it's more accurate to say that there may be differences that are mildly or significantly different from societal norms. And I'm stressing that because I don't think it's fair to say that because someone may enjoy lining up things or may enjoy doing repetitive things, that that is a deficit. I don't understand why we have to see it that way. And what that tells me is that we are saying that this way of being is the standard and that any other way of being is wrong. And the majority of us who are of color know how damaging that kind of thinking is. And I don't feel that it helps anybody to bring that kind of thinking into the sphere of developmental differences. It just adds another layer of discrimination that's unnecessary. So I reframe everything that the DSM says as mildly or significantly different from societal norms, because that's really what it comes down to. So you might see.
I want to ask a question because a lot of what you're saying is bringing up things for me. So I know that there's a movement I've been seeing online in my readings about moving away from deficit model thinking just in education in general. Is that happening for children with special needs and particularly kids with autism, as far as you see from your own experience with your daughter in schools in Canada?
No, I think that it's no. So what I have experienced is that adults who are on the spectrum have been pushing back for years, maybe close to decades, around this deficit type language. And you will find that most adults on the spectrum will not use the word disorder. They will use a word like differences. I'm very proud to say that the way that we've raised our daughter, she's quite proud of the fact that she's on the spectrum. She's aware that she has strengths and challenges. She doesn't shy away from letting people know because she doesn't see it as a disorder. And the first time she saw that wording disorder, she's like, "Mom, what's this? I don't have a disorder. I have differences, but I don't have a disorder." And I'm like, that's my baby. And that's what I want more kids on the spectrum to feel, especially Black kids. They have enough to deal with. They don't have to have this layer too. So no, it's not common yet. But I will say this, part of the problem is that in order to get funding and financial support from the government and other agencies, the deficit definition is still in place so that people can get the services they need, which I think is awful. So there was a movement, I forget exactly when it was, where people were advocating for a change in language, but then there was a worry that if we define it as a difference versus a disorder, then funding would stop. There would not be a reason to support families with the services needed. And that's heartbreaking, because then it means that you have to negatively label your child in order to get the support that you need.
That seems odd to me that the government would be so rigid. Like, I understand the worry, but like, I'm sad it wasn't tested or challenged, because I can't imagine the government on a change of a word to make it more positive for the people who have the condition would say this is no longer a medical condition. I mean, I know it's likely, but my brain is like, that is sad and heartbreaking, as you say. Very sad.
Well, it's not that uncommon. It's similar with other, well, autism is not a mental health concern. It can lead to mental health concerns because of how people are treated. However, most of mental health is defined in terms of deficit. And so in order for people to get support, it has to be medicalized. And the insurance companies also require that kind of language to substantiate why they will reimburse for anxiety treatment, depression treatment, and other challenges. And unfortunately, autism is no different. It has, in order for people to get the services they need, it has to be defined as a disorder. And I really think that damages the self-esteem of people coming up.
100%. And it's so infuriating how everything we talk about eventually comes back to money, even in this case, insurance
Oh my
companies.
gosh.
And there we have it. And there we have it.
Capitalism.
Yes, I want to ask another question because I'm picking up on things you're saying. So you mentioned that autism, an autism spectrum difference can lead to a mental health issue, mainly because of how people are treated.
Yes.
And in my reading to prepare for this interview, I was reading stuff about the uptake of autism diagnoses in Black and Hispanic children in the US. And what the people are saying is it seems like because there's more access to testing and people are learning more, this is kind of catching up. But one of the stats, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it might have been 42% versus 20%, Black and Latino children are more likely to have a mental health issue along with autism relative to white children, to that difference in degree. And do you think that is solely because of racism? That's the first thing I thought of, or is it something else that's going on, maybe because of class issues or whatever? So what do you think that might be attributed to?
So let me just pull that apart a little bit. So part of the problem of why racialized people and children receive a delayed diagnosis, one is because of the services available in the community may not be at a level where they can diagnose easily and provide services easily. But a more common reason is that racialized children tend to receive behavior-based diagnoses before autism is considered. So what I mean by that is the child who is from the perspective of the person watching them, who's not doing it from a strength-based perspective, they're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, just the behavior, not what's underneath. They're seeing a child who may, to them, seem manipulative because they're having a meltdown when they don't get their way. They're seeing a child who is inflexible, and so they come across as obstinate instead of a child who gets anxious when there's a sudden change or even an expected change. So they are interpreting the behaviors negatively. And so for that reason, the information that a parent gets from the school is that your child is rude to the teachers. Your child is always up and bothering other students. They're disruptive. Your child doesn't really interact with the other kids, and that's why they're getting bullied now. Your child can speak, but then sometimes they just choose not to. And so getting that information from the school and then sharing that with the doctor, it's going to skew the diagnosis. And so what tends to happen is that ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or a conduct disorder, if the child is older, that's what gets diagnosed, or some sort of emotion regulation issue. And then it usually can take a few years before the diagnosis of autism is finally given. So partially it's because of how racialized children are viewed. Like there's a bias to why they're behaving the way that they are. There's a third issue, though, that doesn't just affect racialized children. The third issue is that the criteria for autism is based on older research. It's based on a population that doesn't represent everybody. So from my learning and my understanding, it was based on young European background boys. And as we know, it's not just European background little boys who get autism. And so what I see in my practice is that any child that doesn't fit the classic signs tends to get ruled out. And so their diagnosis gets delayed. And so, for example, girls in general really fall into this category where they might be very chatty, they might be very social. And so you have to be more discerning when you're assessing the situation. For example, a lot of girls on the spectrum like to control the play. So if someone is watching that child play, they can easily say, oh, well, they're playing with other kids. Other kids are all around them. They have lots of friends. But when you dig deeper, you find out that they have no deep friendships. They know a lot of people, but there's not like really close ties. That can be a sign, because it takes different skills to be able to have a best friend. Um, the other piece is if the child is controlling the play and then someone else tries to introduce their own ideas, depending on the other child's personality, it that can fall apart very quickly. So what tends to happen is that girls on the spectrum will gravitate towards older kids or adults or younger kids because both types of people will be more accommodating. Younger kids are just fine with having someone else control the play in general, and older kids or adults will follow the lead of the child who's trying to control the play. So what I'm trying to say is that there's multiple issues around why a child may be delayed in getting their diagnosis. One can be related to how the biases that lead people to see a child's behavior only from the negative perspective. Another is that it's based on old data and it hasn't caught up yet to how wide this spectrum truly is. And third, people need to get more discerning about what it really looks like, and that it's not as narrow as what we once believed. It's actually quite wide, and it's a disservice to these children to have a delayed diagnosis because it interrupts the way that they see themselves. They get labeled, they get misunderstood. They tend to not know why they're acting the way that they are, and they internalize that, and it can really damage their experience of school or community life because people are reacting to what they can see, and they don't have any diagnosis that brings out more compassion. Oppositional defiant disorder does not bring out compassion in adults. ADHD, depending on how it shows up, may or may not bring out compassion in adults. And that's damaging, and that's not fair.
That makes me think of a story that I read, again, preparing for this interview, about a mother, Black woman who has a daughter who was not diagnosed till she was 13. Doctors kept saying it wasn't happening, it wasn't happening. She ended up being bullied at school, having to be homeschooled, and she also has juvenile diabetes, arthritis that wasn't diagnosed. And something happened with her falling and hurting herself. And in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, the paramedic says, "Your daughter has autism. Is she diagnosed?" And the mother said, "Finally invalidated." And soon after that, it got diagnosed. But that girl's trajectory of her first 2 years of life was so much harder
Yeah.
on both the parents and the daughter, because doctor after doctor after doctor said no. And I've read many stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
So based on what you're saying now, so narrow view of what signs look like still medically for a diagnosis. And then from what I understand, diagnosis is very subjective, which I think is part of the problem. And generally focuses on the signs that would show up in young European boys of European descent. So that means anybody who's female and who is racialized, like already huge problem, and they are going to be even more delayed, have more problems. Yeah, which is really sad. And I hear the same thing with ADHD. I have a lot of friends who've been diagnosed with ADHD in their 30s and 40s because that's missed in women as well.
Yep, exactly.
I love throwing up the hands.
Yes, it's infuriating because I then end up seeing them as teenagers or young adults and helping them make sense of why especially their school trajectory looked the way it did. And it's heartbreaking because I have to help them unlearn so much of what they internalize about themselves that is it's so negative and toxic. It takes a long time for them to accept that they are worthy, that they don't have to mask, that they don't have to wish that they were normal. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, as somebody who grew up Black and female in a predominantly white school system as a normative child, that was already hard. That the extra layers
Exactly.
must be
Exactly. Yeah.
devastating. No, yeah, and for parents to have to watch this and to be helpless also, right?
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so talking about parents in this particular issue, if so a parent out there is watching this is struggling to get their child diagnosed because the medical system is telling them your child isn't fit or not you, what would you suggest they do to get help faster? Are there any steps they can take to get that done?
So I do what I advise parents that come to me, because I usually I don't some okay. So it's very obvious to me when someone is on the spectrum, and I will see certain behavior patterns, and I will let the parent know this is what I'm observing, and it is consistent with autism. It could be something else, but this is what I'm seeing. And so having a professional who validates what you're seeing can be very helpful, because they can write a simple letter, as I do, that says, I've been working with this child for this long. This is what I have observed. These behavior patterns are consistent with autism. Can you please take another look, or whatever? So that's one piece. Another piece that I encourage parents to do is to start documenting what they're seeing. So when I gave that example of how the child plays with others, even parents will look at their child. Like, if I just leave it at, so does your child have friends? They'll say yes. Do they play with others? Yes, they do. But when I dig a little deeper and I explain to them how to look at the play, then they're like, oh yeah, she's always taking the lead. Or, oh, oh yes, he has tons of friends, but you're right. Like, there's no one that actually invites him over, or he is not inviting anybody over either. So I encourage parents to observe more closely certain aspects of their child's behavior patterns, to and document it, so that they can bring that information to the professional who may be able to assess their child. I'll add one other thing. I also encourage them to look at how the child is eating, if they have difficulty sleeping, and if they have any preferences around sensory related things. So something as simple as a child refusing to wear socks with seams can be a sign. Um, Certain types of textures of clothes can be very irritating to a person, and obviously a child on the spectrum. And so these patterns don't always indicate autism, but they could point to it. And so what I'm trying to describe is paying closer attention to certain aspects of your child's behavior, documenting it, so that you have deeper information to share with the medical professional. The third thing that I would say is you want to go to a developmental pediatrician. And I do know that that can be very difficult to find, and that sometimes the wait lists are ridiculous. However, there are some developmental pediatricians who tend to prioritize autism and ADHD, and that's the kind of person you want to go to. If you live in my community, I can definitely recommend someone. My favorite person to send people to who live in Durham or Toronto is Dr. Hanley Derry. He is in Scarborough. And what I find is that he gets people in pretty quickly, usually within 3 months, whereas other doctors, parents are waiting for a year. So that's one option, is to go to a developmental pediatrician that has been recommended or other parents have suggested. You can ask other professionals who they would recommend, so that you can get a list of names to work through. The other way of getting a diagnosis quickly, but it's quite costly, is to go to a psychologist who specializes in children and adolescent challenges. So what would happen there is a psychometrist or psychologist will do what's called a psychoeducational assessment, which goes into quite a lot of detail, but includes how this child or teen, how they are They will assess their social emotional skills and challenges in addition to their intelligence from different perspective. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. The one thing I picked up on what you said, I've heard about the psychology way. I've never even heard of a developmental pediatrician, and it's kind of sad to me because I know if I am, adjacent to the medical community, and that means parents out there have no idea. I've never didn't know that was a thing. Again, and I imagine when you go to your GP, they're not saying, "Oh, well, maybe try this." So, like, how do parents even find these things if they're not connected? And they're just starting the journey.
I have to say, the one good thing I have found
yeah.
in our area is that depending on when a child or teen gets diagnosed, so if they're younger, what will happen is that they'll also get referred to the local developmental agency. So, for
Okay.
example, in Durham region, it is Grandview Children's Center. One of them in Toronto is Holland Bloorview.
Mhm.
I think another is Surrey Place. I feel like they changed their name, but either way. So there's multiple developmental agencies. It's just that kids age out of it, I believe, by school age. So that's what I mean by young children. So sorry, I didn't finish that thought. So my point with that is that once they get referred to that developmental agency, it's usually a multi-professional kind of situation where you do have a developmental pediatrician leading the team, but there's also a social worker. There's usually an occupational therapist, speech and language, OT. So all of these professionals will come together and assess your child so that you're not having to meet with individual professionals. You can do it in a team setting. So that's usually how parents get connected to a developmental pediatrician. But sometimes they might need a second opinion, and that's why you need to know where to find a developmental pediatrician in the general community, not just at your local developmental agency. There's something else that you said that I wanted to speak to, and I think I just lost it. I should say that the cost. Oh, sorry, I remember what it was. Usually, a GP will also say, okay, I need to refer you to a developmental pediatrician. So that is the way that a parent can get connected as well, especially if their child has aged out of being referred to a developmental agency.
Can I ask a question
Sometimes,
about that developmental agency thing? Why is the age out so low? Like, what's that about? That seems really unhelpful.
so how it's organized, at least how it's been explained to me and what my direct experience has been, is that the developmental agencies are meant to provide services to children who have not entered school yet. The understanding is that once they enter school, the services that the developmental agency provided are now provided by the school, but usually not in the same way. So in the developmental agency, the child is getting one-to-one support usually. However, in the school, the support is indirect. So the school usually will partner with certain services. They've changed the name again, but I'm accustomed to calling it CCAC. So they will Community Care and Access Center, where they have community-based nurses, social workers, OTs, PTs, speech and language. So an agency like that will consult with the school and give direction to the teacher on how to support the child. Teachers have enough on their plates.
Right?
It just
Right?
feels like a tall order. The other thing that they will do is they will observe the child, and they may even talk to the child, but it's still left with the school to implement the strategy. So the school will get recommendations around support materials or ways of helping the child regulate while they're in school. But the child usually will not get direct services once they enter the school system. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
May have went off
ma'am.
on a
Okay,
tangent.
let's hit the next one. So once a child gets a diagnosis, so you've been struggling to get the diagnosis, you get it. What are the next steps parents should take to make sure they're getting the support they need at home, medically, and then at school?
So, in general, the first thing that they want to do is to get onto uh, it's a waiting list, but the Ontario Autism Program is the program that provides the funding, and it's meant to be a one-stop shop to connect you to the different services that will support your family. So OAP is the first step. It's and usually the developmental agency or the doctor who made the diagnosis will give you the information you need to apply for the program. The unfortunate piece is that, like I said, the waiting list, there is a waiting list, but it's quite significant. My family, we were under a similar program, but a different name, and it took 4 years. And what I'm hearing from parents today is that it's quite similar. It's a good 3 to 4 years before they are approved for funding, which is anyway. So there's that part. The next part is then applying for the different funding that is available to you. So again, the developmental agency or the diagnosing doctor usually gives this information, or you get connected to a social worker, either through the school or through a different community agency who can give you this information. So it's things like special services at home, which can cover, it provides funding for respite and for other services. It's quite detailed, so I don't want to go into it too much, but you can easily find the information online. You also want to apply for the disability tax credit, so that for parents, they will usually get a slightly higher sum than they would normally get with just the child tax credit. And so they'll get a certain sum, and their tax bracket is usually lowered a bit because of this tax credit. So there's a number of government services that you can apply for that can provide some funding. So that's the first, and I gave 2 examples. The other piece is to have a connection to your local autism chapter. So it's usually Autism Ontario or something like that. And the reason for that is there's usually a professional who's leading it, who can let you know about the services available in your community and help you just become more aware. And then you can start sorting through those with your spare time to see what would be a good fit for your family. They also can usually connect you to other parents who have a child or teen on the spectrum. You definitely do not want to do this journey alone. You need to be connected to other people that get it, and so that you can get good ideas and you can support each other. I would just say to be wary of groups where people are just complaining about the system. That can be soul sucking, and the system is broken, but we still need to work within it. Our children's future is at stake. So it's okay for people to be complaining or to share their concerns, but you don't want to be in a group that only does that. It needs to be more focused on how can we make this work for us, or who do we need to bring our concerns to, so that we're not just in an echo chamber about our concerns. We're actually bringing it forward to someone who can do something about it.
That's wonderful. Okay, for the sake of time, I want to stop you there because you could talk forever about this because you know all the things, and I so appreciate you for that. I so do, because I'm learning a ton. It's crazy. So last question. So we mentioned that people who are racialized have a hard time getting diagnosed, girls relative to boys also. So are there support groups for people who are BIPOC, Black specifically as well, and also girls in this community or in general that you know about for people with autism that people can tap into?
So I will try to answer this question very concisely. So number one, my personal focus is on girls on the spectrum, because there is the services available are do not match the need. And so that's what I specialize in. I have not seen a robust enough, or maybe robust is not the right word. I have not seen enough services advertised, and maybe I'm just not aware of them, that are directed towards girls on the spectrum. So I feel like it will be challenging, but it is something that more people are aware of and are trying to address. I did do a search on the internet for organizations that support the BIPOC community. and there are a few. I haven't dealt with them directly, and so I can say names, but I think what I'll do is provide the link so that you can put them with this
Yeah, I'll put them in the
podcast.
show notes. Yeah.
So what I can say is there's the Autism Ontario Black Caregivers Circle. There's also the Ontario Caregiver Organization, and there is the Black Parents Support Group. But like I said, I haven't had direct experience with them, but I know from my own experience, I wish that I had other Black mothers in particular to connect with. I did get support from other mothers, but it is different as a Black woman raising Black children. And I wish that I had that support.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your input. Okay. So we're going to wrap it up here. But before we do, can you please tell people where they can find you, social media, website, etc.?
So my website is www.theelderberrytree.com. As you mentioned earlier, Bisa, I am a registered social worker. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I specialize with stressed out parents who have struggling kids and a particular interest in kids who are on the autism spectrum.
Excellent. And do you have social media platforms or not so much for that at this point?
I do. So I do have an Instagram. It's at Grit Club.
Karyn, thank you so much for being here today. I learned a ton. I hope you, the audience out there, learned a ton as well. And I'll definitely put her website in the show notes as well as the organization she mentioned for parents who may be in need. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. I truly hope that you enjoyed today's podcast, and I look forward to seeing you here next time. We got a brand new show and a brand new topic. Till then, take care. Bye.